Hey there, hi there, hello there. Once again, you're with us for Bowen on the Birds. The internets were not kind to us last week, and we had the show got scuttled, but we brought back the same guests this week. We just popped them in the microwave for 30 seconds, and they seem fresh as new. We're going to have Mike Kaye up first from the Charlotte Observer, the paper I started out at many centuries ago. And Mike is from this area. He covered the Eagles for a long time, and he's got a lot of people down there that we know, like Duce Staley and Frank Reich and Miles Sanders and Camus Grugier Hill, even. So we're going to talk to Mike. Then we're going to have Chris Franklin for the latter part of the show. Chris worked with me last year for NJ.com, and he's still with that establishment this year covering the Eagles. He had all kinds of availabilities today to talk to us about. And of course, the Eagles roster is sort of set, kind of, sort of. And we want to talk to him about that. So this is Bowen on the Birds. If you were looking for like a cooking show or something, you might want to adjust your podcasting dial. But I'm going to bring up Mike Kaye right now and not prevail upon his precious time any longer than we need to. How's it going, Mike?
It's going well. How are you?
Great. Just great. I was down there in the Queen City last week for a wedding. I'm sorry we didn't get together, but I know you were very busy you had a preseason game in the sweltering heat Friday night, and you had cutdowns and all that good stuff. And I was reading all about it the whole time I was home. So a very different situation there than what we have in Philadelphia. You have a first-year quarterback, Bryce Young, with a lot of expectations and hype. I gather you guys hadn't really, Friday was kind of a reassuring performance for you in that regard, that you hadn't seen enough from him in the preseason to really get a good feel for what was up.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about rhythm runners, like running backs who need a ton of carries to kind of get going. I think Bryce Young is kind of that rhythm passer, and to have 2 series here, 3 series there, 2 series here, with an offensive line that in the first preseason game was rotating out right guards. That's not really effective. And I know, like in preseason, I think it's a weird balance where you're like, hey, I don't want to show anything, but also am I kind of containing the specialness of a player? Like I heard Chris Sims have an off the cuff comment about how he goes to the gym and people are like, that's supposed to be Bryce Young. That's the #1 overall pick. What's special about him? Well, I think we saw a lot of the special in the offseason program, and it was almost like he was coached not to take deep throws because they want to contain what they're doing downfield. It was like he worked on short and intermediate stuff. And so I think seeing him kind of be uninhibited in the offense the other night was really nice to see.
Okay. So you covered Jalen Hurts here. Do you draw parallels? Is it hard not to draw parallels when you're seeing guys, that of that stature and that pedigree, that the general type of game? How do you view that?
Well, I'd say they're both very much Saban guys. They're not going to tell you anything they don't want you to know. Bryce took a little while to kind of lighten up. I would say Bryce is more outwardly playful. But then again, you have Jalen Hurts who speaks in bumper stickers, which I kind of love from a headline standpoint. So both of those guys are not going to be interesting for your sake, and both of them are pretty much all about that football life. But I think they're both tremendous leaders. They're both really sharp, smart guys. They know what they're doing. They're incredibly dedicated. Jalen Hurts has maybe the best work ethic I've ever seen for a quarterback, at least of a quarterback that I've covered. And Bryce is kind of built in that same vein. I think he is a very humble kid. I think he is a very smart kid. And the fan base is pretty excited about him. I mean, I know he's got a relatively diminutive size. I know he is a guy who played at a really successful program and had the benefit of that. But I will tell you, this kid is, from an intangible standpoint, built where you where it's needed at the quarterback position. He's extremely smart. He processes extremely well. He doesn't have the biggest arm,
Mhm.
but he is accurate and sharp, and all those
Hyperbolic.
hyperbolic
Yeah,
things that we talk about, but they're true with him. It's
that's
just a
great.
matter of him staying healthy and uninjured.
Mhm. Yeah, he has to have a good offensive line in front of him, and I think that's going to be a little bit of a struggle. But so you've been down in Charlotte a while now, and I get down there a lot. I'm from there. I haven't lived there in 40 years, and when I was working there, it was a very, very different market than Philadelphia in terms of what fans expected, how they related to the teams, and so on. I would say that's probably less true now because so many people have moved into that area from places like Philadelphia that it doesn't really have that provincial character that it might have once had. But how do you see your audience? Is it very different? Do you have to approach things any differently than you did in Philly? Do you get different kinds of feedback than you got when you were working here?
Well, I mean, for those who don't know, I covered the Jaguars before I covered the
That's
Eagles,
right.
and
Yeah.
this is kind of similar, right? Like, because you left before there was an NFL team, and
Right.
so this is a team that grew like millennials grew up with this team. So
Yeah.
like I'm around the age base of the fan base.
Right.
It's definitely different. I think you're either a hardcore fan or you're not a fan. And I feel like they have had the kind of success like the Jaguars where they haven't had a back-to-back plus 500 team in the history of this franchise. I
Mm.
mean, Jacksonville obviously went through 10 years of struggling, but I think they're a fan base that's really creative. They're a fan base who the educated fans are very educated. There are times where I'll talk about the salary cap and somebody acts like I'm a witch and they should burn me at the stake. But, I mean, look, I think with Philly, I'll say this. So I grew up with Andy Reid as the head coach while I was in high school
Mhm.
and really taking an interest in football. I was reading you, I was reading Damo, I was reading Jeff, I was reading guys like that.
Mhm.
And Andy Reid had a way before social media of explaining football in a way, Jim Johnson as well, where
Mhm.
you understood aspects. I think they educated so many fans in Philadelphia and put them on this trajectory. I mean, look, there's a lot of us that came from the blogging sphere that are extremely successful now, not coming into journalism the way that a lot of other people did in a lot of our peers and colleagues came in. And I
Mhm.
think that is built on the notion of what Andy Reid was able to cultivate from an educational standpoint. I think Jim Johnson was very good at explaining his defense to you guys. You guys asked great questions. Not to kiss your butts, but I mean,
I was usually asleep most of the time. I honestly,
well, I mean, you as a group, I wasn't just giving you credit, but
I know. I know.
I think a lot of fan bases aren't like they didn't benefit from having a lot of sharp beat writers
Yeah.
all the time. I mean, look, Scott Fowler, my columnist, was an incredible beat reporter. Joe
Mhm.
Person, who comes from the Observer's incredible beat writer. Jordan Rodriguez doing great stuff at the Rams. They had that, but like the quality and quantity in Philadelphia is much different
Yeah.
than most markets. If you've ever been in another sports market, and I think
There's a much tighter focus on the NFL in
right.
Philly than there is in Charlotte. Yeah.
I also think that Philadelphia fans look for other stuff in different, like with other teams, like they're competitive in that
Yeah.
way, and that they want to know more about everyone
Right.
by comparison. And so I think that prepares you education wise and in a way that Philadelphia is so unique in all
Mhm.
sports, not just football. And so I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it would be interesting. The divisional thing, I think, plays into that. The NFC East is very established, and these are rivalries that have gone back for generations. Whereas, again, with the Panthers, you just don't have that. It would be interesting if the Panthers were in a division with Washington, because people my age who grew up in Charlotte grew up watching Washington every Sunday. And that was kind of your team. In fact, for a while, they consciously made an effort to have North Carolina players like Sonny Jurgensen. There was a really, it was almost like that was the home team, and even after the Falcons came in, the Falcons were kind of interlopers, and Charlotteans don't really like Atlanta for whatever reason. I think they see it as kind of a rival in some ways, city. And I don't think people there really care that much about the Falcons, but they did care about Washington. And, I don't think there was a league-wide focus ever in Charlotte. I don't think anybody knew what the heck was going on with the Chargers or the Raiders or anything like that. But you kept tabs on Washington. It's a shame that, they're in the same conference, but they're certainly not in the same division. And you're in the division with some teams that, really aren't natural rivals, I don't think, in any geographic sense.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And it carries over to baseball too. But I've got the MLB package. I can't watch Atlanta. I can't watch the Nationals. I can't watch the Orioles, and I can't watch the Cincinnati Reds for some reason.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's you're paying for what is there, like 162 games? You're paying for like 135 for the price of 162. So
wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's not
great. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you about Frank Reich. Is Charlotte Frank Reich very different from Philadelphia Frank Reich? You knew both of them.
Yeah, I mean, I would say obviously he's a little bit more assertive. This team's his, and there's no speculation on who's making the play calls or anything like that. I think Frank meditated on his time in Indianapolis while he was out for that half season, and I think he was ready to get back in. Chris Ballard gets criticized for several things, and a lot of it's fair. So does Jim Irsay, and a lot of it's fair. Most of it's fair, probably. But I think what Frank was for this franchise was the safe choice. When you go from a guy who had no experience in the league, who was trying to run his program like a college program. And
it was a disaster.
It didn't work out. You go to the NFL lifer, who is a quarterback mind. He's actually the first offensive head coach in the history of the team.
Did not realize that.
Yeah. Wow. And he's really cultivated this incredible coaching staff of really sharp up-and-comers and then really great veterans like, Jim Caldwell's on the staff. Dom Capers is back. He was the first head coach in team history. They've got Todd Wash, who was the defensive coordinator. Now he's their defensive line coach. I covered him in Jacksonville. Duce Staley's there. Yes. Sean Jefferson, a longtime NFL wide receiver, who's now a great wide receivers coach. James Campen, who was a former offensive lineman, who's now a great offensive line coach. Actually, outside of Stoutland, I'd say he's probably the second best offensive line coach in the league. And he's got his hands full right now. But it's a really impressive staff.
Wow. Well, that's something. And Duce is there. Do you get a lot of time with Duce? When here in Philly, it was really very few and far between the opportunities to talk to Duce. It was always interesting when you did.
Yeah, I mean, it has been few and far between. He actually called his own shot in a press conference the other day and just was like, "Yep, okay, cool, I'm done." But my conversations with him have been good. Miles Sanders, who's here, we've had some good conversations. He seems pretty relaxed here.
Duce was big on Miles. Seeing them reunited is interesting because we had for years and years, not years and years, but for a few years, we had this whole narrative around, can Miles really carry the load as a number one back without getting hurt or run down? And last year, he pretty much proved he could. But interestingly enough, that was his last year here. And now he's back with Duce, a guy who really believes in him, I think.
Yeah, I would say so. And listen, I mean, I remember vividly being at Miles's pro day where he lined up in the slot for Trace McSorley in his passing drills because he didn't have enough wide receivers that were qualified to be there. And Mike Groh and Andy Weidel, they were all there. And you could kind of just tell that they love this kid. And I remember bringing that up to Joe Douglas after they drafted him. And he goes, oh, yeah. Okay. And look, I think he had a lot of believers in there. A lot of those believers are no longer there. That doesn't mean that they didn't believe in him in Philly this offseason, but Howie doesn't pay running backs. The last guy he paid
a
was
second contract for a running back is it's kind of a faux pas in the NFL today.
for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Hey, Mike, we're gonna have to go to a commercial here real quickly. No, we don't. I'm sorry. We are not going to commercial. That's the old format. We don't have that format anymore. And it's going to be hard for me to, frankly, every 15 minutes, I'm going to be reminded that I'm not going to commercial. I'm really set in my ways, but we're not going to commercial. You can imagine one in your mind if you would like. Anyway, Mike, with Duce and Miles, I know Miles was a little resentful of what happened in Philly. I think he thought he certainly deserved that deal. Has that kind of all gone away now? Does he think about it at all? Have you talked to him about it lately?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's disappointed with how it ended, but I also think he's really excited about this opportunity. He's got a young son now. He's relocated. He had like an incredible turnout to his first camp, summer camp, football camp, I guess you would call it.
Yeah.
Here, right before training camp.
Well, Duce was a big name down there, as a player. Yeah. He played at South Carolina.
Sure.
And actually, when he first got out of the game, he was an announcer for the Gamecocks, I think. Right. And, so people down there certainly know Duce Staley, and that's a good brand, I think, for Carolina.
Sure.
So tell me anything else that's come up that Carolina related that might be interesting to Eagles viewers. They don't happen to have an extra punter hanging around there, do they, that they could just send up here? Because that would be good.
No, but they do have if there is a future Hall of Fame punter, it would be Johnny Hecker, who signed here last year. What I would say is Camus Hill had an amazing summer. I mean, I
saw that, yeah.
Yeah, he had 4 interceptions in 10 training camp practices. Really, just was great throughout the summer.
Mm-hmm. And a good guy to talk to.
Yeah, absolutely. He is doing a lot of stuff for Maui, obviously having the Hawaii background.
Yes.
But he has really kind of ingrained himself in this team. I know he's bounced around the last few years between the Dolphins, Texans, Cardinals, but it seems like he is now kind of, he's that special teams ace again. I think he's very much in the role that he had the year the Eagles won the Super Bowl, where he's primarily playing special teams, but he's got like a sub package role on defense. And I think he's very comfortable with that at this point in his career.
Well, that's really cool. Good to hear it. So I know you keep up with the Eagles still, because I see your comments, and I talk to you about it here and there. I'm always interested in what things look like from the outside, because on the inside, I think there's a very monochrome view here of this team, that it's really loaded, and there's great expectations. Does it look any different from afar?
I'm really interested to see how Cam Jurgens does at right guard. I think that's going to play pretty heavily into their success. Lane Johnson has always really thrived against bigger guards, or right next to bigger guards, and Cam Jurgens is not that.
Right.
I think from a running back standpoint, I like what they have as far as a rotation. I'm concerned about Penny and his health, obviously. I also wonder if Swift is one of those guys who you're like, can he only be good if he gets the ball a bunch? And I think that's something that is
that does happen. Yeah, that's absolutely a thing. Yes.
Imagine Shady in a part-time role. To me, that you remember the rookie year with Westbrook, where he was kind of used a little bit early on and didn't really get off to the best start, and then he eventually kind of caught on. The same thing that happened with Miles Sanders with Jordan Howard. So that intrigues me. I also think from Nakobe, maybe I'm a hater. Maybe I'm just a little hesitant on this. I don't see it with Nakobe Dean like other people do.
Yeah.
I think he's fine. I don't know if he's the guy you want as your starter for the next 6 to 10 years, right? Seward Bradley was that way, right?
Yeah.
Where Seward Bradley would flash and be really good, and then you'd be like,
yeah, I kind of think Stewart was headed in the right direction, and then he got that ACL injury.
right.
I'll never forget that day. It was the funniest. It wasn't funny, but maybe ironic is what
Right.
I'm really looking for. The Eagles were having their first training camp outside of Lehigh in many, many years, and it was a big deal at that point. Now we've gotten used to them having it NovaCare, but that first year it was like, we're not going to be able to go to Lehigh. So they had a bunch of these live practices, open practices at the link, like 3 or 4 of them or something. And the very first one, starting middle linebacker tears his ACL. And that really just sort of, ever since then, the link practice thing has been going. We're down to 1 now, and I don't think we're getting any more anytime soon. It just seems like that was an idea that was cursed from that moment on. I don't find them that interesting, as if just watching them. It's not like Lehigh. You're not right down there with the players the way you were at Lehigh, but yeah, the Stuart Bradley, it was a very interesting case. Getting back to Nakobe, his size has always kind of concerned me, and I didn't see anything last year in those very few snaps that he had. It was not a real what you would say audition for the job in any way. But they do love him, and I got to think they know what they're talking about. But we'll see that, and I think that he got a small injury in training camp, and I think a lot of the beat writers were really looking at, okay, are they going to do something now? Are they going to go out and get somebody? I think there is a sense of unease around that situation, very definitely. But they ended up cutting all but 3 linebackers, so they're either waiting for something else to develop, or they're very, very confident in this group, I guess. That is all I can figure. Have you seen much of Nick Sirianni in this offseason? And I think he's handling the aftermath of the Super Bowl pretty well. He's taking a very sort of strict tone with the team. He's been very animated in practices. He's kind of banished talk of the Super Bowl, last year's or this year's, coming up. I think he's kind of doing what you need to do, which is getting people focused on one step at a time. And, we got to play the Patriots September 10th. Have you noticed that? Do you see him that way? What do you pick up about Nick?
Well, I haven't been paying attention exclusively, honestly. This is probably the least amount of attention I've paid to this team since I covered the Jaguars. But look, I think Sirianni is at this point where he was in a prove-it year, that first year. He's now proven himself. I mean, the guy's made 2 playoff runs in his first 2 years after being considered, a weird hire.
Yeah.
And I think he's confident. He knows what he can do. He's seen the results. And I think he's kind of getting a clean slate here with Gannon out and Desai in. And then, he's got 2 coordinators who have some pretty high hopes. And I think Brian Johnson's going to be a very good influence on this offense. And I agree. In the minimal stuff that I've seen, he does seem to be attacking this pretty well. And I think I don't know if that was necessarily the case at the combine, but I think since the draft, his messaging has been very much on point.
Very good. You brought up Jonathan Gannon. Now, there's a subject. I know you were one of Jonathan's biggest fans in Philly. Let's talk about that a little bit. You really dodged a bullet there. I'm glad Carolina didn't get involved in that sweepstakes. It was really interesting after Gannon left here. I don't think it was a great parting. I think there's some acrimony there from the Eagles standpoint. We all remember the Super Bowl. Certainly from the fan standpoint, there's some acrimony about the way the defense didn't adjust and just was totally helpless the entire second half of the Super Bowl. You were a guy who probably could have seen that coming, because you were more of a skeptic than I was, I have to admit, all the way through Jonathan Gannon's tenure.
Yeah, I think Look, I think Jonathan's a really smart guy. He was billed to me when he got the job as like a defensive Sean McVay. Um, look, I think that first year you could argue he didn't have a lot of
Right.
tools to do what he wanted
Yes.
to do. That is fine. That is actually pretty common amongst defensive coordinators, especially first year ones. But I think the way he went about things, his messaging, there's one way to be, you and I have covered a billion press conferences between the two of us. Like there's a way of delivering a message where you don't give things away, but you also aren't making other people feel like they're questioning their intelligence or
Yeah.
feeling like you're
Right.
being condescending or whatever.
Yeah.
It just kind of felt like, yeah, we know that we don't have talent, but we're just going to attack the same way. It's okay. The scheme will prevail. And that was to me asinine, frankly.
Yeah.
And I think there are some pretty notable people who have called out that defense. It does put up pretty numbers. There's no doubt about it. He also had a ton of talent last year. Like
Yes,
that might be the most talented defense. I mean, Jim Johnson never had that talented of a defense. And so
that was my bugaboo was, they put up numbers. They should have put up numbers. They were loaded at every position. Even the linebackers played well. But then they got to the Super Bowl and they were just flat-footed, it seemed like. They couldn't stop the run. They couldn't stop the pass. They just sort of stood around and watched as the Chiefs played. And I know Patrick Mahomes is great, but the Chiefs didn't go undefeated last year, it was just I'm not usually the sort of person when a coach takes a different job who says something like he was thinking about that when he should have been. But the way all that went down with him being in Arizona, for the Super Bowl and, immediately after the game, taking this job was just, it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, does it not?
No, I think, from an outside standpoint, I think if I were a fan, I would be very frustrated, especially because he left for a job that it seemingly no one wanted.
Right.
Like
right.
no one
be a head coach,
Yeah. It was almost like he got away just to get away. And I think, I think you can kind of see it in baseball. Philly fans want what they want, and they will encourage you if you treat them with respect.
Mm-hmm.
And if they think that you're struggling, they'll try to pick you up. And if you don't take the baton, well, that's going to be tough. And I think, Trey Turner is a guy who picked up the bat or the baton or whatever you want to call the instrument.
Very good point.
Alec Bohm, again, another guy who has thrived after some adversity. It just kind of felt with Jonathan Gannon, this was always a launching off point, and talent be damned, whatever, his scheme was going to overcome. And we've seen stuff like this. Chip Kelly was another guy. Scheme will overcome.
Oh,
and it didn't. Congratulations. So I think, I think Howie Roseman's drafted as well as anybody over the last 3 years. I think that when you look at what they've done defensively, they have filled this group with a lot of young talent that can prosper for a long time. They made the right head coaching hire clearly. I know that Jalen Hurts adores Brian Johnson, and I know Brian Johnson is considered a big up-and-comer within the league's coaching circles. And it's going to be interesting to see how they move on from this big departure in Gannon and also Shane Steichen, by the way, who took another job I don't think a lot of people wanted.
Right.
He was interviewed by the Panthers, and they decided not to move on. But, working with Frank Reich, you kind of get a feel of that entire coaching tree pretty harshly. And I think there's a lot of Frank and Nick. I think there's a lot of Frank and Shane. I don't really see the Frank in Gannon.
Okay. That's a good point. Well, I'm going to let you go here, Mike. I know you've got a busy day down there in the Queen City of the South. And is it going to be a thunderstorm today? There's a thunderstorm every day I was there. So
I seem to go for a walk and it decides to torrentially downpour every single time I do that. So we'll see. I'm going to go for a walk later and I'll let you know.
And our viewers, you can follow Mike on the platform formerly known as Twitter, at Mike Kaye, and read his fine commentary on the Observer website. And thank you again, Mike, and I hope we see you down the road.
Thanks for having me, Les. It was an honor. You're the best.
Great. Thank you.
See ya. Bye.
So we're going to have Chris Franklin coming up here as soon as we can manipulate the magic of the platform. Interesting points Mike made. We didn't get around to our agree or disagree topic because, Mike covers the Panthers now, and I didn't think he would have a take on this. But we will get to that with Chris. The agree or disagree is I'm really thinking the Eagles should have done something to get a punter in here in the offseason. The way this has worked out is just not cool for me. I know they think they're going to be okay with this. They've got Sipas on the practice squad. I don't know what they're waiting for, if they think somebody's going to get cut who's actually good, or if they have a trade in mind, or if they just don't plan to punt at all this year because the offense is going to be so incredible. But to me, this is kind of something that everybody saw coming, and now it's kind of a mess. I want to see what Chris Franklin thinks about that. Let's bring Chris into the picture from. Are you in beautiful Delaware? Is that where you are at this
time? We're in the mothership of Mullica Hill, but in the office right now, sitting back there. I'm in that now. It's fun. I feel like I'm
down in South Jersey than I am, Ben.
Yeah. It feels like I'm in an episode of Spider-Man No Way Home, Far Home. With I saw Mike here, and I get to see you. I'm feeling nostalgic right now.
I sure appreciate you being willing to do this. I know it's a busy day. So did you heard my monologue on the agree or disagree question? Where are you going to fall on this, Chris?
I agree that they really should have brought somebody in, just for the fact that not only are you want to see more of what they can do in punting, but also when it comes in terms of that field goal operation. I know we saw Brett Kern come in last year and do it quickly. You were able to bring him in, sign him when Sipas got hurt, and the field goal operation went on without anything wrong going with it. But I think there should have been another guy out there. They should have looked for it. Maybe even burn a 7th round pick on a guy you really thought was good. But I'm looking now, unless I know they got on the practice squad. Maybe if they can't find anybody, at least elevate them for the first three games. But
yeah,
personally, I look at Pat O'Donnell. I think he's a guy just released by the Steelers. He's a guy I'd be interested in because he places the ball, might be better inside the 20 more consistently. But
yeah. Well, all these weird, cut down day was so strange across the league. It's gotten stranger and stranger over the years as the practice squad has grown. And they, of course, after they came in during the pandemic with the rules about being able to bring guys up for the weekend, you didn't used to be able to do that, so people manipulate the 53 in all kinds of strange and wonderful ways. And the Steelers, for a while there, had 2 punters. I don't know if they thought they were going to trade one of them. If nobody thought they were going to go into the first game with 2 punters. That's unheard of. And the Eagles, of course, had none. And, it would seem there would have been a trade there somehow, but there wasn't. So, it's a weird setup. And Sipas, when Howie spoke yesterday, he even went back to the Super Bowl. He mentioned that in his remarks, did he not? And obviously they didn't think everything was fine. They brought in Ty Zettner, who from the very first OTAs, I think that what I was seeing from you guys was that he wasn't any sort of improvement ever. There was never any thought that he was better than Sipas. And Zettner since then, he went somewhere. Was it Houston? He went for a few days and then
he got cut. From there.
The Eagles, for most of the time that I covered the team, had very good punting. And, now they don't. And I don't understand what's going on there. What do you think is going to happen between now and the 10th? Do you think they'll go into the opener with Sipas?
I wouldn't be surprised if, say, next Monday or Tuesday, they start the competition. They work out a couple guys just to see it. Maybe a lefty, maybe a right-footed punter, just to not only get that, but get some of the returners some experience for seeing both punts off both their legs. But I think when we're all said and done, when you're going into that opener against the Patriots, I think you'll see Siposs elevated, and it'll probably be one of those late elevations because unless somebody wows them, I can see them wowing them because then you're also looking at the whole. If you put somebody on a veteran, they're on your roster week one and everything, it's a guaranteed contract versus that, and you want to guarantee a guy that you're not really sure about. It's one of those things. So I think they're as much as fans don't like to see it, and I know the frustrations and it's warranted, especially seeing the inconsistency because you see times when you see Siposs, he'll get like a 4 or 5 second hang time in a good spot. You're like, all right, this is good. And then there's a 30-yard punt that just rolls and rolls and rolls. So.
Well, that's the thing. He's kind of to me, he's a microcosm of the whole special teams conundrum with the Eagles, which is his overall numbers are pretty good. You know, his gross and his net and all that, except you look at specific crucial situations and say, oh my God, you know, like the Super Bowl, like that punt, you know, 60 some yards, you can't have that. And that's the way the Eagles special teams are. You know, and that was during the time last year when I was going down to the press conferences and Michael Clay would be talking, it would be like, yeah, you have this stat and that stat, but every week something potentially catastrophic occurs and this isn't good. And they just don't seem to be able to get out of that mindset or pattern or whatever you want to call it. They also don't have a returner right now, Chris. What's going to happen there? Are they just going to bring up Britton Covey for the opener and call it a day, or are they going to try to find somebody or develop a guy on the roster now?
That's the biggest question to me. I wouldn't be surprised if they brought Covey up too, but you also look at Olamide Zaccheaus. You know, he's been back there returning punts, and I thought it was pretty telling. I think looking back on it now, early on when they were giving Zaccheaus a lot of opportunity, Justin Evans, he was another guy that was back there returning punts, and then you had Zach McPherson before his Achilles injury. He was back there returning punts. I thought that was looking back, I thought it was very telling in how much they really, really relied. Oh, well, if they wanted to bring Covey back on the main roster or not, but the fact they were cycling through that. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's Zaccheaus, but I don't see them going into the game with just 4 wide receivers on that roster. So I wouldn't be shocked if Covey gets that thing because the fact you have 4 wide receivers and 4 tight ends, yeah, I think one of the tight ends is going to be deactivated for the game, and you bring them up for that.
Right. That is interesting, though, and you got to talk to Alberto. Now, I actually wrote down the pronunciation of his last name here. According to the interwebs, it is Okwuegbunam. Is that your understanding?
This is going to sound weird, but I was trying, and every time I keep messing it up because I thought of it along the ways of like the song "Oh Canada," whatever. So I was trying to get, and I know I'm going to butcher it. That and also
there, yes.
That and also the Hot Chili Peppers. Hey, I would tell you that. It's like, listen to what I say when he's doing his press conferences. But
well, this is the one thing they did, you know, with the 53. They brought guys into the practice squad, but that doesn't really matter. This is the guy that they went out and got, you know, and so they traded for him. What's your take? You know, what do you see there? How was he today and so forth?
Well, I think overall, when you look at that, you saw why they were intrigued by him, especially with that game against the Rams he had when he was the Broncos. 7 catches, 109, touchdown night. And you saw the physical, like the attributes that he has that you can bring that. I mean, that's really good. The one thing, and I was really disappointed. Like I thought Tyree Jackson was going to be like that type of guy, like that could be that complement to Dallas Goedert, especially in the red zone. I think he can be. I think Alberto can be a guy that can do that if he gets the opportunity to do so. I mean, does he go into automatically as a tight end too? You gotta. I think they're going to work him and try to work him into that eventually. But you got Jack Stoll there. I think if anything, I think he goes ahead once he learns the system. I think he goes ahead of Grant Calcaterra, and then I think you start to see if he can have that. You can move him up that way. But when you're talking to him, he's looking at the opportunity. He thought there may have been an outside chance that he may have been waived as well too. So that's why he was glad he got showcased in order to have that opportunity to do that. He already knows when you look at the way the system runs and how they use that 12 personnel, the 2 tight end sets, the 13 personnel, he fits in what they do there. And
Yes.
he acknowledged it. Everybody knows that he's more of a receiving tight end. And he's still working on his blocking too. But he
Right.
says he's basically working. He's worked on that. And he thinks he's going to surprise a lot of people when it comes to his blocking ability. And if that's the case, that he does become a true blocker, like a guy you actually respect when it comes to blocking on those run plays, on those zone run plays, the outside runs, you don't have to worry about him grabbing somebody's shoulder and you're going back 10 yards for holding. I think it made sense to give up a late round draft pick just to get him, secure him, so he won't go through waivers.
Right. Well, that's an important point, and I should bring that up because everybody watching and listening might not be totally up on this, but the Eagles, you claim guys on waivers. Well, the problem with making the Super Bowl is you have the 31st waiver claim. So if the guy's any good, you can put in a claim, but he's not going to get to you. So what they did, and I thought it was pretty astute, is they swapped draft picks in 2025 or something like that, to get this guy, giving the Broncos something instead of them getting absolutely nothing and waiving him. And that was enough to keep him off the waiver market, without really, giving away assets or anything. Changing spots in the draft 2 years from now is not a big deal, but that's what they're going to have to do if they're going to try to get people through on, to the roster who've been waived or are being waived. They have to know that this such and such a team is looking maybe to waive this guy. And, if we want him, we better do something. And it's a tough position to be in. It's good to be that guy, that team with the, although you're a bad team probably, but if you're sitting in that first or second or third waiver position, all kinds of goodies can fall your way.
Yeah, big time. Like, that neighbor. Okay, thank you very much. Add this here. There you go for it. I think when you look at the way the Eagles, when it comes to that's where you really need to project your guys out. I mean, how many times have we seen in the last couple of years when it comes to comp picks and the Eagles getting these, they're able to make trades like this. I mean, the fact they were able to move up in some of these drafts because they know they're getting comp picks back. Like Javon Hargrave, they know you're going to let him go. They're going to get somebody else to replace him. And now all of a sudden you have a third round pick. Maybe you can do something with a later third or something else down the line. And you can project that out when you start looking at 2024, 2025. Like, we'll probably get a pick somewhere else because somebody's probably going to sign somebody to a bigger deal. We can make this up somewhere else. Let's try to do a deal so we can get talent that you need right now and worry about it in the future. And we've seen Howie in terms of finding a way to make a trade to acquire more picks. So it was worth the risk.
I want to get to something that really interested me this week. I was not surprised by it. K'Von Wallace. There was a lot of buzz about him in camp that he was doing better and, it was a different defensive coordinator. And I thought, okay, maybe. But I watched K'Von Wallace for 3 years. I did not see it, in terms of, he played okay on special teams. A lot of guys can do that, but he was a fourth-round pick that was supposed to be a steal in that draft. It was really funny. In 2020, obviously, everybody wondered about Rager over Jefferson, even at the time. Second round was Jalen Hurts, and a lot of us felt like, hey, what are you doing here? You just gave this contract to Carson Wentz. You need to get him either somebody to shore up what was a sagging defense at the time, or you needed to get him a weapon, which you've done a terrible job of doing. Another weapon, you drafted a quarterback, and then the fourth round they get K'Von Wallace, and everybody's like, oh boy, that they got that safety from Clemson. That's going to be the steal of the draft. That's going to be the guy that everybody, looks back on this draft and says they got K'Von Wallace in the fourth round. And just from day one, I never saw it. I didn't see anything special about the guy. He was a strong tackler when he got there. He wasn't quick or instinctive, it seemed to me. And I was not surprised that they moved on from him. He's now with Jonathan Gannon out in Arizona. Some people were surprised, I guess, but because the Eagles, the safety spots were up for grabs in this camp. And, it's not like they have the best safety room in the NFL, but were you surprised? And what did you think of K'Von Wallace's career here?
I think when you look at the first two preseason games, I thought there was still a shot he was going to make the team. I mean, he was getting first team reps, and it was like, wait, K'Von's playing a lot here. And then by that in between preparing for that game against the Colts, joint practice to start seeing like tide started turning a little. Like Evans is starting to play a little bit more, and you start comparing them side by side. Like, all right, Evans adds a little bit more. Ty goes to Evans, who can return kicks and who can also fly down the field as well too. So it's like, hey, you see that? I mean, that was my first year seeing K'Von. I thought he was going to be like your strong safety type. Like to me, I thought he would be what you would have gotten where Terrell Edmonds is right now.
Yeah,
Guy who can go into the box. A guy who can, you at least you don't need him to be free safety. You don't need him to try to cover somebody 20, 30 yards down the field, but can be effective covering hook to curl, covering say that second level around that coverage area. He'd be all right. And it just never materialized. And the scary part was this has been the best he's looked at this year. This offseason has been the best he's looked in any of those years. So you're thinking like, maybe it clicked.
That was a big part of my point is, okay, he had an okay training camp, but he's 26 years old. He's been here forever. Good Lord. I mean, what do we Tom Arnone made a good point there that, maybe they gave him those first team reps early in the preseason just to get a feel for how he looked in this new defense, and they didn't much like it. They didn't think it was any different than what he looked like in the other defense.
Yeah. And you think, especially in this, and Sean Desai uses three safety looks a lot. He uses a lot of big nickel where he'll take the linebacker out, which is another way I think, reason why, looking back, I think they keep three instead of having a fourth linebacker. They use a lot of big nickel to use a safety to cover those tight ends in that intermediate part. But he had ample opportunities to make this team because of that. And the fact that he didn't rise to the occasion, especially that last week, I still thought even up to the Colts game, he had a shot. And then he didn't just take advantage of it. Evans made a few more plays in practice. The next thing you know, K'Von Wallace is playing late into the fourth quarter.
Well, you mentioned Evans, and that's something I want to circle back on. I'm very interested. I don't know the guy at all, but I know his history. He was I believe, second-round draft pick initially. Mm-hmm. And he had a really bad injury that basically took 2 years to get over. Before that, he was well thought of, and I think that's a worthwhile guy to be here and to watch a little bit and see if he can get it back, because I think he's maybe more than just a guy you find on the street. What have you seen?
I know before this year, after signing, I heard and Howie confirmed as well too. This team thought very highly of him. Well, a few years, they really, really wanted him. And the fact they were thinking about maybe trading for him at time point or not. But they really like him. I look at him as a guy. He's an interesting guy. I mean, the guy's in a Muay Thai, guy's an MMA guy. He's really, really instinctful in his life, and he uses that MMA type style. He's to try to be a piece, but then all of a sudden he gets on the field and it's like this switch flips on. It's like, all right, I ain't messing with this guy. This guy's pretty much anything on that way. But for me, I just want to make and for some of the other positions that you see around there, for me, it's about him just staying healthy. When he's healthy, and you don't have to worry about that, he's a guy who has some range, who you can worry about, who will be a risk taker when it comes to trying to take the ball away. Which I think when you look at what they have in Blankenship and what they try to preach throughout this training camp, that fits well with what they do. And I don't have any. I personally don't have any. When looking at this tape from this past preseason, I don't have any reservations if he's back there. The only reservation I had, like when it comes to his knowing his assignments, where he's going to go, my biggest one is to make sure, like, all right, is his knee going to be good? Is his arm going to be good? Is his shoulder going to be good? Is he going to miss some of this time? Because you're already thin at that position. You don't need to lose somebody else, and that's the biggest thing I'm worried about when it comes to him.
Okay, well, that's very well said. Okay, so everybody wants to see Sidney Brown. All the fans want to see Sidney Brown starting. My position going into camp was, okay, he looks like a great prospect, but that's a tough position for a rookie to be a starter. There's a lot you have to know. There's a lot of institutional knowledge required to play that position at a high level in today's NFL. And I'm still, he made some splashy plays in the preseason. He's a big hitter. I'm still not sure I would start him week one. I would think he'll be a starter before the end of the season, but I just don't know that he's ready to go week one, out of the gate as a guy you want on the field all the time. How do you feel about that?
I think he's still a little green in terms of some of the deep coverages and passing off, because in that system, there's a lot of communication that happens, a lot of passing off when it comes to the zones. And all it's a lot going on. And he's still getting acclimated to that aspect of it. We've seen the one thing that, the biggest question I have, especially with a young safety in this, is the responsibility when it comes to the run, because again, in the system, there's a lot placed on the safety because you don't have the big of linebackers, but B, when they're pulled to the side doing a motion, safety has to run up there and from like 10 yards back and make sure to try to get the stop. He's done well with that. The one thing I wish he would do more, instead of just laying his shoulder into somebody, wrap them up, because I could just see somebody lowering their shoulder, bouncing off that, and they're going up 5-10 yards, and you're looking like, hey, it's a nice hit, but just give up another 5 yards. But I think promising. I see a lot of promise there. I would be surprised if middle of the year he starts to take over maybe for Edmonds, and you see him and Blankenship, and that's your safety duo for the future. But there's still a ways to go. I wouldn't be comfortable with him starting. I'd become a mix of him here and there, but starting, I think, is still a little way too soon for that, unless somebody gets hurt. But it's still way too soon, I think, for that.
Chris, were there any surprises for you when the 53 came out? Was there anything that you were puzzled by or didn't expect, other than what we've talked about with the punter and so forth?
4 tight ends. I mean, I thought that was a that was a choice. I didn't foresee that coming. I thought that I know Stoll. He's your blocking guy, and I think Goddard and Stoll too when we were locks. Calcaterra and Jackson, I think, are like, all right, that was a question, but I can see why he took Calcaterra over Jackson because of blocking when it comes to that. But I didn't think they add another guy and keep him on there. When I look at I was surprised they were able to get through that. I thought they should have, and I was shocked they actually did it, was keeping those younger guys, Eli Ricks, Mario Goodridge, on the roster as well too, because I think they have a core that could be similar to the way we saw in the early 2000s when Lito Shepherd, Sheldon Brown took over for Troy Vincent and Bobby Taylor. I think they have a young core that in 3 or 4 years from now, you get a couple of those combinations of Job, Ricks, Goodridge, what have you, that can be that type of thing that replaces Darius Slay, Vontae Maddox, and
really good.
And Bradbury. I think they have that. And
I don't think fans realize, they did do the contracts with Bradbury and Slay, but both of those guys are over 30 now. And that's a bad place to be on the corner. It's not like being a kicker or anything. So it's important to have that. It's very reassuring that they have all this talent in the corner room, and they really do. I've been impressed with that group all through the offseason and the preseason. I really like a lot of those guys, and that's the kind of thing that really can sustain success. When you have older players who are really, really good and they age out, and you can replace them, without giving somebody $100 million or spending a first-round pick, that's a heck of a thing. That really is.
At a valuable position, because we all know how important the corners. And the fact that I think the only way that works is when you have guys like Slay, when you guys have like Bradbury, even Maddox, when it comes to helping out Goodrich, guys that are willing to teach these guys to do that. Because there's a lot of times where you're like, oh, I know my contract's up in 2 years. Why should I help this guy? Because he's going to be taking my job. Absolutely. These guys, and I will say when you look at Slay, the way he teaches, the way he keeps those guys after practice, the way he tells them, listen, I've seen this guy, I've seen this move here, he's setting you up to do this. You see them give those little pointers, and they keep them close, and you mix those guys together. It's only how benefits you for the long run, and the willingness of those older guys to do that. It helps out tremendously, so you can see them taking over. It won't be as much of a drop-off or weird spacing between them when they finally move on and go their separate ways. They can just step right in and then be impact players. And who knows? But even then, still, maybe they draft somebody 2 years from now, one of those top 3 picks. But at least you have guys who on this roster right now, if something were to happen, they can step in and still play at a high level because of what they taught them.
All right. Chris, I wanted to ask you about Derek Barnett, because that's been interesting this week. It came out that they'd given him permission to look around for a trade. Not that they were going to cut him, but he's clearly in a very limited role here unless people get hurt ahead of him, and he would rather have a bigger role. I don't think there is a trade just from the standpoint of you could get somebody to give you something for Derek Barnett and have him on your 53, the team that's trading for him. But the idea that somebody's going to say, oh boy, Derek Barnett, he'll start for us. I don't see that. And I think it's very unlikely. I mean, if he just wants to leave, I think he can probably leave, but to really materially improve his situation, I think is not going to happen. What do you think?
I think it was interesting earlier when they restructured his deal. They gave him they gave him more guaranteed money, but they made the more incentives. And when I asked him, he was like, yeah, it's basically the men upstairs suggested that for me to move. That's like, okay, that's interesting there. But I thought that he was going to stick around. And in fact, I think he saw the writing on the wall when they saw who they kept. Because Nolan Smith's going to get more run. Yes. You know that you're going to have all these other guys on the outside getting the edges, and he didn't know that. I don't think anybody, unless there's a team toward the deadline that is really, really looking for that. Similar to the way the Eagles reached out to Chicago to try to get Robert Quinn. Now, I'm not comparing them and saying, oh, that's Robert Quinn and ever that. But
if a team has injuries, then they might look around and say, okay, who can we get cheap that's experienced and won't kill us out there, except with the penalties where he will kill you. Derek Barnett, I can see that, but I just don't see him as a saleable commodity. And I kind of wonder, and I don't know Derek well because he was not a guy that liked to hang around the locker room and talk to us, and that's probably not changed a whole lot this year. I just wonder if he isn't happy in his role, is that going to be a problem here?
I don't think so, because I look at the way that everybody is even up to when this trade request came out, and I think he knew beforehand he wanted to get something done before we all knew that the trade request was done. Everybody players. I asked Jordan Davis, some of the other defensive linemen as well too. They all love the guy. They say he's great to be around the locker room. So I don't foresee that. I think everyone says yo, get your money, man. Do what you got to do to make it best for you. I don't think it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not playing. You shouldn't listen to these guys like that, and everybody becomes a malcontent and he comes like a cash in the locker room. I don't foresee that happening here. Even Jeremiah Watts from that, but I look at it. I think he's going to be more frustrated than anything, and I think he'll keep it more internal. And I don't think it'll be something that spills over and you have to worry about getting the captains involved, coaches involved, and we're all hurrying up to his locker every day. Like, what's going to happen? We have TO drama going on here. I don't think it's going to be anything like that, though.
Okay, yeah, I hope you're right. Well, it's been a really interesting week in Eagle Land. And again, this team, I think, has dodged some bullets in the preseason. They have a couple injuries, but not to people who are like key contributors. Everybody has a couple guys that are down for the season. In a lot of cases, it's somebody crucial to success. That hasn't happened here. And it didn't happen last year. So, I think they're really keeping their fingers crossed as they go forward here that, they're looking very, very solid. I think Jeff McClain today, my former colleague at the Inquirer, posited that this was probably the best roster Howie Roseman had assembled. Where are you on that? I think he might be right. I mean, it's hard to say at this point, but I do think that's a big possibility.
I'll say since I've been on the beat since 2020, I think when you look at those four teams, I definitely think it is like the 2020 roster. We all know what happened with that, right. But I think looking at last year's roster compared to this, they filled a lot of those holes that you had question marks about. Would you like to see C.J. Gardner-Johnson here? Yeah, but we all saw that was going to happen. You would have lost Bradbury and possibly Slay too. But I think when you look at that now and you were able to backfill it with Sidney Brown and with you saw continue development, Reed Blankenship. Yeah, that's the biggest worry I have. And then also when it comes to linebacker, that's the only other thing I think when you look comparing it. I think when you look at to me, T.J. Edwards, Nakobe Dean, I think right as of where they are right now in their careers, I think that's a wash. I'm more concerned about that other linebacker when it comes to it. That's the only question I really have when you look at that roster. Because Zach Cunningham, when he's on and you see why he fits his system better, I think Miles Jack did. Well, I think he retired too. I have no problem with that. It's when you look at some of the other guy. I think that. But otherwise, when you look at the rest of the roster, when you look at the depth they have in skill positions, everything else, this is probably the best job I've seen since I've been here.
Good to know. Well, that's about it for us today, Chris, on Bowen on the Birds. Please subscribe to A2D Radio and all of its good stuff here. Take care, and we'll see you next week.